All right. Happy New Year, guys. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are and when you're hearing this. Good morning for me right now. It's like almost 5 a.m. I've been up for quite a while. I think a pretty intense, super full moon tomorrow, and I tend to feel the energy of the full moons and I don't know what they do to me exactly, except that I definitely don't sleep. And it's sort of a consistent theme. So I've been up since 1 a.m. and just scurrying around. I don't know what I've been doing, but I've been awake. And I think quite often when I'm awake at whatever this sort of mystical hour is, I tend to feel like this is when I feel a pull towards recording a podcast. And I'm feeling a lot of that forward momentum energy this morning and the last couple of days. And, I think people have a lot of feelings about the new year and when the new year actually starts and what is like the seasonal start versus the calendar year versus sort of the conditioned idea of new year. And regardless of how you feel about when the year actually starts, I think there's something really beautiful about the start of a new cycle and sort of the ceremonial aspect and ritualistic elements of the intention that comes from being present with how do I want to allow a shift in energy to take place? How do I want to allow a shift in energy to take place within me? And just bring some intentionality into my days. And I think any opportunity to do that and implement that, I mean, we could do it at any time, but is certainly a worthwhile energetic to tap into, right? So, yeah, I've been thinking about the podcast and what I want to bring forward energetically as we step into 2026. And I got to tell you guys, there's so much energy within me that is just like, let's go. I just have, I started to say zero F's to give, but that's not it, actually. It's just, I think there was so much about last year that was really confronting for all of us. I'll speak for all of us, although I don't know, but I have a sense around just how we need to allow ourselves to really be honest about whatever came up last year that we were being asked to release. It was a snake year. There was a lot of shedding, and I think for me, there were themes around being seen and being seen in ways that might be different than some of the conditioned ways of showing up from a clinical perspective or in the work that I have done up to this point. And I feel like I've talked about that ad nauseum, but yeah, like in the space of moving forward, I feel like there's just a lot of energy and fire within me around like the conversations that I feel really hungry to get into. And so I feel like I want to jump right in. And it's funny, I had a workshop a couple weeks ago at this point. Maybe it was a week ago. I'm losing track of time already. I think you're just started. But yeah, I think it was a little over a week ago. And the title of the workshop was Off the Apps and Into Community. And I was just so excited to see the turnout of certainly people that showed up for the workshop, but also people that were just signed up for the workshop and hungry to have the conversation. And it's such an interesting thing, guys, as I'm someone who, is in love with love and obsessed with talking about love and relationships. It's sort of my thing and what I love to explore relationship dynamics and how we meet one another and what makes meeting one another a little bit more challenging sometimes than at others. And there's so much in the cultural zeitgeist that I feel like is maybe by design, really in the state of heightened polarization. And that, there are a lot of podcasts by sort of, let's say like the manosphere, I don't know, that are sort of like challenging like men and how they show up in relationships with women and like taking their power back. I don't know. I don't listen to a lot of this podcast maybe, but I hear conversations with clients and, girlfriends talking about like their challenges around men. And obviously I'm speaking in a heterosexual context in this case, but I was thinking about this British Vogue article that came out a few months ago, and it was called Is Having a Boyfriend Embarrassing? It was an article by a woman named Shantae Johnson. And I think it was sort of as is often the case with these magazine articles, sort of a, clickbaity, sort of inflammatory title. But what I found she was getting into when I actually read the article was a little bit different than the title might suggest, right? And what she was really talking about in this article is having a boyfriend embarrassing, that everyone sort of took off and ran with, like, see, it's like embarrassing now to have a boyfriend. It's chic and cool to be single. And that's not exactly what she was saying. I think she was sort of speaking to the fact that in many ways we are living through an era where for the first time, relationships are certainly not required for survival. I've talked about, and many people often talk about the fact that until 1974, which in the history of the world is not actually a very long time ago, women weren't able to have their own bank accounts. So being in a relationship often was really linked to survival. And we are living through a time where that's not the case anymore. And also what she was talking about in the article was that it's no longer sort of seen as like a status symbol to be in a relationship, meaning I think there's, up until recently, there might have been just sort of like social stigma around being alone, being unpartnered. It'd be like, oh, so-and-so's amazing. Why hasn't this person found anyone yet? Or that's why you have no boyfriend because whatever. I don't know. But that's sort of shifting, and that it's not sort of certainly the status symbol, but also the form of identity that it used to be in a relationship or have, a partner. And what I was saying in that workshop around like getting off the apps was that I think in so many ways, this is a really beautiful thing. And I actually really loved some of what she was saying in this article around this thing of like our relationship dynamics being recalibrated around the idea that I often speak to, which is that it's, I believe, crucial to our relationship structures and our relationships thriving for us to shift away from this idea that we're incomplete until we're in a partnership. What I think that does and has done historically is put a tremendous amount of certainly pressure on relationships to be everything for us, to sort of live up to the hype of what we are conditioned to believe a relationship should be or offer. But also just this thing of living really rich, full lives, so much so that when and if a relationship dynamic comes into your life or is in your life, it ends up being like the icing on the most beautiful, delicious cake ever, but that we're not looking to another person to be the cake, to, fill us up with all of the deliciousness, that we have that deliciousness in and with ourselves. And, something I feel like I've spoken about and explored for the last few years that sometimes I think I get a little bit of pushback on, I think not necessarily that people are specifically pushing back on me, but I think some people might disagree with my stance on this from what I hear in the realm of, relationship psychology and personal development sphere. Is there's this idea that, we need one another, and we need sort of the solid foundation of a relationship to really feel like we can thrive in the world. And I would say we need one another, certainly, and we need relationships of all kinds. And an important caveat to that is that different people have different needs in terms of what they need relationally to thrive. Not everyone needs a great deal of interpersonal connection at all times. As someone who is, pretty introverted and really enjoys and thrives in a space of solitude, I feel like I have often been just kind of acutely aware of how our culture makes someone who tends to have a little bit more lone wolf energy or really be okay in the space of spending more time alone. There's sort of a cultural idea that immediately needs to be pathologized or is a form of hyper independence. And I don't necessarily think, I know that's not the case. I think that different people have different needs in terms of what feels satiating in terms of closeness and connection, and that's really okay. But, if we go back to the article for a second and this idea of, is it embarrassing to have a boyfriend? I think it's less about like having a boyfriend being embarrassing. Absolutely not. But what I do think has shifted is what might be embarrassing. Embarrassing is kind of an interesting word, but I think what has really shifted in terms of the cultural perception is that having, quote, someone in your life is enough, right? And so I think that's sort of the point that I want to get into. And I think this is across the board, regardless of gender. I think just this idea that like having someone on your arm is something that you should be proud of has sort of died or is dying, and that it's less about like someone being here, but that the person who I am in relationship with or connected to is so unbelievably inspiring. And, I feel enlivened and awakened by all of what this relationship is challenging within me, that becomes sort of the why, right? And I was thinking about the Eden Project, In Search of the Magical Other, I think is the full title of that book. And it's James Hollis. And, Hollis talks about just this idea that we are sold in this society, that this magical other will sort of step in and be the higher power, the godlike experience that we've been longing for and were longing for when we were young in our parental figures, and that inevitably we feel shortchanged by who this person is. And something I've been struck by over the last few years is how much the world of relational psychology really sort of affirms this idea of the magical other, even when, what they're saying, whoever is speaking to this idea of relationships and finding another person, they will say not that like, there's a magical other that's going to solve your problems, but the way it is framed is sort of that our work is to not believe in the concept of, quote, the one, which I agree with, but it's that what we should be searching for is the good enough partner that you build something with, and that is what makes them the one. And this is where there's a little bit of nuance and a little bit of subtlety that I actually disagree with, because while I agree that no matter what these relationships are for us always are just these unbelievably potent, transparent mirrors that show us ourselves, and that all of the things that activate us in relationships, whether they're romantic, friendship, familial, are showing us ourselves, what we believe about the world, what we believe about who other people should be in the world to us and for us to feel a sense of safety in our skin. And that information that we have the invitation to look at and come into relationship with as it comes to the surface, inevitably in relationships, is really what the point is, right? So, circling back to Hollis's premise in The Magical Other, that we believe that someone else is going to solve our problems or make us more comfortable. All of those things may be the byproducts of what it is to relate to someone and certainly feel connection and satiating love and aliveness. But that to me is not necessarily like the point. We're not like looking for someone to extract those things from. Um, we're not sort of, I believe, moving forward going to be in the space of believing that that's something we're entitled to or that is someone else's job. But that, when I have really done a lot of work to be in relationship with myself and know myself well, then when there is someone who is just so inspiring to me, and who they are and the way that they see the world and what is evoked within me in our connection is so potent and strong. And I like to say often that it becomes clear that this is something that was brought into my life to support me in the next iteration of who I am becoming. Then it becomes justified to partner with this person because of who and what they are, right? And if it's not that, then yes, maybe conceivably it could be embarrassing, but I would say even more than it being, quote, embarrassing, it becomes for us to be curious about, like, if I don't feel all of those things, if I'm just sort of like always in the space of frustration and feeling like this person has a lot of potential, but they're not where I would like them to be, for me to feel like they're the person that I'm proud and excited and thrilled to be in relationship with. If all of those things are not the case, what is different is that that says so much more about me than it does about that other person. And I think that is something that we are awakening to. Yes. And I say this as someone who I think at certain points in my journey and in my relational life would have winced hearing that a little bit, because I think it probably would have hit a little bit close to home in terms of, just the things that I felt challenged by and, was often maybe complaining or speaking to other people about in terms of my relationship dynamics. But I think there's something about the invocation and the return to the aspects of the sacred, and that what I've been so struck by is how much, as we are a society that I believe we're living through a transitional period where we're coming back into the space of remembering how much we need lives that have a fuller sense of meaning and purpose, and purpose being beyond sort of like the work that I do or my job, but really like, who do I want to be when I take that last breath? Like, who do I want people to remember me as, if that's a thing that I feel concerned with? But also, how can I really put in the work and the effort to be the most actualized version of me that I am capable of being, right? Sort of that Abraham Maslow idea of like, self-actualized people are in this space of saying to themselves, I must be what I have the potential to be. And I think that that is sort of the shift in consciousness that is awakening within us collectively, but where I don't hear us often thinking about life that way or expressing a sentiment that is in alignment with that is in our relationship dynamics. But I think that's what's shifting, right? That we're just awakening to the idea that being in a relationship and talking about how frustrated you are with your partner consistently, but not to your partner directly, is not the flex that it once was, right? Like, that's sort of, that might be embarrassing. That might be, in terms of that article, what Shantae Johnson was alluding to. Although, again, I read the article and I don't actually think the article was as much about, in the way that it sort of suggests that it's embarrassing, so much as there's a different level of consciousness that maybe we are bringing to this thing of relating. But here's something I found interesting last night. I was reading through threads and I saw this thread by Jillian Turecki that I thought was really potent and important, and something that I feel as a conversation I'm going to feel a little bit compelled to to speak about and think about for myself, but also that I think in terms of the feminine, those who identify as core feminine energetics or women, I think there's something to think about in terms of how we are holding relationship dynamics. And let me read the thread first. What Jillian said was, a lot of women say they want an emotionally available man, but someone who is emotionally available isn't just telling you how they feel about you. They're sharing how it feels to be them. So if you want that in a man, you need to have the capacity to handle those conversations without judging him, fixing him, or seeing him as weak. Now, I love this because I think there's so much of the way that we are holding what it is to partner and love and relationships, or what it has been, that is really not talking a lot about like what is required for the type of like felt experience of the epic love that I sometimes speak of in terms of like the desire. And there's this thing of like, do I want to be the partner that I long to experience? Do I want to be that, if we're speaking heterosexually? Do I want to be that for the man in my life? Or do I just want to feel like he should, what is it, bring the princess treatment and treat me in all of these ways that I feel like I should be treated, but also that, there are all of these ways that we've sort of been, for the last few years, culturally conditioned to hold, quote, patriarchal men, and what needs to change about like how men are showing up. And what I don't know, I often see spoken about is the lack of preparation we as women have had to sort of be that partner for a man who has really done a lot of the work that we are talking about longing for men to do, and how much just the energy of certainly reciprocity, certainly seeing that man differently than maybe we've been culturally conditioned to see men, as like, not having the depth of internal landscape that women do, like, and just like challenging these like cultural ideas that are just not true about men, and certainly are not going to make us the type of partner that can continue to thrive in that relationship dynamic that we say we want. So the short gist of what I'm saying, since I feel like I'm sort of talking in circles and not being the most articulate about that, is just this idea of, I have found myself sometimes with my unpartnered or single female clients who are often talking about, the challenges they face with men and why there are no good men, and men are, challenging in ways that, I might not say, but, and what I have really said was, I think sometimes what is important is for us to take a pause and a step back from being in relationships with men, if we are dating men, until we really feel like we love and respect men. Because the thing about life that I have found, y'all, whoever's listening in general, is we will always find what we are looking for. So if I believe, and I don't believe this, but I'm using this as an example, so I'm going to quote it big hard quote on this. If I believe, quote, men are trash, or that there are no good men, life will show me that, and I will not be a vibrational match to anything other than what I believe to be true. So it's really, really difficult for us to call in aligned partnership and the type of partnership that we long for if we're not a vibrational match for that. And a man who has done a lot of work to know himself well, respect himself well, be in right relationship with the healing that he has done to be in his skin with a sense of dignity and integrity and all of these things that I think would be admirable from most of our perspectives in terms of, what we would want for men. That type of man is not going to be attracted to a woman that believes or says things like men are trash. That's just facts. It's just, and I think that that's something that we need to, to really sit with and think about, right? Like if I don't believe that something is possible, then I'm not going to experience it. And um, am I going to have the capacity to really hold the depth and the complexity and the beauty of what masculinity is, and integrated masculinity and the wholeness of a man who has integrated, hopefully, both the elements of his masculine and feminine? Do I feel prepared to hold the complexity of that if and when that comes into my life? And if I do an honest inventory for myself and I don't know that I do, then I think that that becomes information for me around where I may need to do some preparatory work to be in alignment with the type of relationship that I long for, if that is what I long for, right? So, I'm saying all of this to say, what became clear to me as I was noticing how many people signed up for that workshop I was talking about at the beginning. And I think I had 520 people that signed up to get the link to the recording, although I think we had 100 people in the room, which was amazing. I mean, so exciting to have 100 people in the room to talk about getting off the dating apps. But the conversation for me was really about how we just get out and start to live and thrive in our lives in general without so much attachment to, quote, finding the one, but just knowing that the one will find us as we're living our lives, and that becomes a different way of holding it and reframing in terms of a belief system. And what became really clear to me in the conversations in the room that evening, and has just been clear to me for a really long time, because I can tell from the energetics of what I'm speaking about and how people are responding to it. And, I think that's true in all facets of our lives, right? Is that people are still really hungry to love and be loved. Of course we are. It is the most human desire possible. And feeling frustrated with the state of love, relationships, dating apps, all of those things, right? So it's holding the juxtaposition or the tension of two opposites, that I long for this still. I really do desire to have this in my life, and I feel a little bit disenchanted in terms of possibility. And I don't think that anyone is wrong for feeling that, but I think that if that is the truth of how I feel, then that becomes a really beautiful opportunity to take a step back, a deep breath, and really look at how am I holding, one, what relationships are? Have I really come into right relationship with what I've been conditioned to believe about whatever, gender I am attempting to love and be in relationship with? Is there a little bit of a reckoning that I need to do for myself around some of the culturally conditioned beliefs that I want to put down so that I would be a match for the type of person I want to attract into my life? And that I think when we do that, all of a sudden what we see and how we experience the world and the people around us starts to shift, right? So this is me saying, no, I don't think in general at all it is embarrassing to have a partner, boyfriend, girlfriend, whoever in your life. I think it is such an unbelievably sacred gift when it is aligned, when this person brings so much richness and inspiration and life force into your world. But I think what is shifting is that we are coming into a little bit more consciousness and a little bit more deliberate choice energy around when we choose to partner, right? That it's not just sort of willy-nilly, I'm out here and whoever I land on is my person now because we're in a, and not that I'm, listen, if situationships feel aligned, do you, boo? But that I think a lot of those things I don't think are going to be coming with us into 2026. I think there's all these ways that life is asking us, and we are responding to the ask to be just so intentional with how do I want to show up? What do I want to invest my time and energy into? and why, right? And I think that includes our relationships, and that includes how we are just sort of sharing our energetic resources and our life force and our bodies, certainly, with other people. And so there's a larger conversation there, but I think that's a huge part of it. So I pulled a card this morning, and this card is from the Sufi Tarot deck. I'm just sharing it for anyone who sees it on YouTube. And the card I pulled was Wali, which is traditionally, let's see that, the Chariot. And the Chariot is sort of an interesting card for this conversation because it's normally like fast moving energy, which I think speaks to the fact that there's just a lot that's shifting at a rapid pace in terms of how we hold all of these relationship dynamics. And to me, this is a good thing. I think if I were to be in prediction around how relationships are going to continue to shift this year, especially, I think people are going to be just like less concerned with like finding the one and really in this space of loving the one that I am and loving this life that I'm living, and how do I really invest in becoming the love of my life so that whatever I'm attracting is just a vibrational match to the love that I've cultivated within, right? But I digress. So the Chariot upright is mastery, moving ahead, taking the first step, victory, speed, action, being mentally in control. Known as the Chariot in traditional tarot, the Wali is a master. He is an adept rider who has developed the inner capacity to effect from a position of skillfulness. He is motivated, ambitious, and represents victory, triumph, and movement. We see him balanced atop two horses, galloping across emerald green waves of the ocean without any reins. He controls them by will alone, honing in on that which lies within his mind to achieve mastery over form and over himself. In Sufism, the horse and the rider represent the balance of the body and the soul, with the horse being depicted as the body and the rider as the soul. We must nurture both to win the race, for it is only when both the body and the soul are taken care of that one can reach their final destination. It is the balance between the body and the soul that leads to mastery. When this card appears for you, you are being called to examine the balance between the inner and the outer in your life. This card represents a victory and mastery over a situation. It is a very positive card, but it indicates that effort is needed to manifest the success it depicts. What do you need to do to achieve triumph? Is there an area in your life that needs to be balanced before you can move forward with ease and speed? What do you need to do to rise and ride above dysfunction? The emerald green water the Wali glides upon so effortlessly represent the emotions he has mastered. Do you experience any emotions that keep you from success? Emotions that you still need to explore and work through? Contemplations. What is my relationship with self-control? What in my life needs to be brought into balance for me to succeed? And the affirmation is my mind, my body, and my soul are in perfect harmony. See, I love this card for this conversation because to me, this speaks to everything that we long for is on the way. It's like the idea of manifestation, and that so often when we think about manifesting whatever it is that we desire, we understand that energetically it exists already. That's always the case. But becoming a vibrational match for whatever the thing is that we long for is the work that we do in this moment to receive whatever is there energetically, sort of, what's like is it an escrow? I don't know. Dene. But the point is that, that there's work often that I think, if there's something that I long for relationally to experience, my work really becomes about how do I do the work that I can do in this physical world to be a vibrational match on a soul level for what it is that I long for. And it's so funny. I was having a conversation a little over a week ago in a friend who has, an online community, and we were talking about some of what I was just talking about and how relationships are shifting. And what I was saying, I think, is so powerful to me that I've come to understand more recently is that there's so much about the work that we do when we are unpartnered or by ourselves that really becomes preparatory work for learning to stay in our bodies and have relationships where we can have conversations as our adult self versus our activated child. Meaning, the one thing that I've learned over several years working as a couples therapist is that a lot of times when we're in conflict relationally, it's just like two activated inner children sort of going at each other, sort of, trying to hash out whatever the conflict is. But it's really an attempt to get my needs met without being able to see the other person, because I'm not actually in conflict with the other person. I'm often in conflict with the parent or caregiver or pain point that I have experienced historically that this conversation, this moment in our relationship is bringing to the surface for me. And so in that way, a lot of times when we do some of the work of learning to stay in our bodies, to titrate into difficulty, to be in relationship with our nervous system, maybe not like control or regulate, because we will always be in present-centered relationship to what is this, asking me to be curious about, not sort of shut it down, not sort of like make it so it's a controlled state, but really be in acceptance of and the observer of, right? But it becomes really hard to do that and stay in our bodies when we inevitably feel a charge or an activation, as we will relationally, if we haven't practiced it, right? And so we can do that at any time. And I think, first of all, we're always in a relationship, regardless of if we are partnered or in romantic dynamics. And so we can practice it in all of our relationship dynamics, whether that's with coworkers or familial relationships or our friends. And I think so much of, how we're starting to look at relating to one another is just this understanding that it's a really sacred privilege to love and to be loved. And it's no longer, sort of circling back to that article, that like my identity is wrapped up in my relationship, or that it's a status symbol to be in a relationship. I believe that we're evolving beyond that, and that if and when I choose to share my path with another person for however long I choose to do that, it's because it is so unbelievably aligned. And I know that for sure I am growing and I am being challenged and I am being reminded of so much of what I have the potential to become and do and experience in this life through what this relationship dynamic evokes within me. And I love thinking about it that way, but I truly believe that that is the awakening to the true essence of love. I think that's a lot of what I heard James Hollis speaking to in that book. I was talking about the Eden Project, who a friend in one of the groups that I facilitate reminded me of the other day, which is a book that I just love and cannot more highly recommend if you've never read it. But yeah, just I think we are evolving in the way that we hold this. I feel excited. Oh, and this is what I was going to circle back to. I sort of was in this reckoning last year, like, do I still want to be someone talking about relationships and love? And what I realized is I absolutely do. I love it. I think it's a little bit, in the realm of my superpower. And I'm just hungry to talk about it in the way that it's evolving and the way that we are putting down what no longer serves. So here's the first episode of 2026. To be continued for sure. But thank you for spending this time with me. Thank you for kicking off the year with me. And, hopefully if you could hear the sound of my space heater, because it's a little cold this early in the morning in my home, thank you for your patience with that. But I'm excited. I feel like we are evolving in all of the conversations that we're going to have this year and all the ways that we're going to hold ourselves and the truth of our power. And I am here for it, y'all. So can't wait to be with you again. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a beautiful rest of your whatever you're having, day, evening, etc. Be well. Take good care of yourselves. Loves.